Welcome to the News Roundup for Tuesday, December 23rd, 2025. I'm Bill Thomas. Christmas is right around the corner, and here's what's happening right now. Congresswoman Ilhan Omar's remarkable surge in net wealth under renewed scrutiny, with a Republican lawmaker now calling for a thorough investigation. The financial fallout from Minnesota's staggering welfare fraud schemes now reaching all corners of the state, as nearly 100 local mayors warn Governor Tim Walz that his mismanagement is now threatening their entire way of life. And lawmakers in Washington take significant action to safeguard American taxpayers by introducing something called a WALZ Act targeting future welfare abuse nationwide. Also, the Pentagon weighs in on China's escalating military buildup as the president introduces a new Trump class of modern battleships. And a Hollywood insider finally revealing why legendary filmmaker Steven Spielberg has a long-running feud with actor Ben Affleck. All this and a bunch more, it's coming up right now on the Big Roundup. We have a great deal to get to today, and we'll begin here as the Somali connection to Minnesota's staggering fraud scandal continues to be revealed. Representative Ilhan Omar now facing a fresh round of scrutiny for her jaw-dropping increase in personal net worth. You know, we've heard from a number of people who are terribly curious about this, and you might be as well. According to the Congresswoman's most recent 2024 financial disclosure form, the 43-year-old Democrats' combined household wealth has gone up an astonishing 3,500%, and that's since the end of 2023 alone. That means her current fortune is something in the neighborhood of $30 million. And stop for a second and really drink that in. Now we'll take a closer look at how Omar claims she came about all that hard-earned cash. And for starters, she's pinning the blame on her own husband. Yeah, throw that poor slob under the bus. Former political consultant turned venture capitalist Tim Minette claiming that he's had a good run of luck lately with a couple of his enterprises. And just how good, you might ask? Try this one on for size. In just 1 year, Omar says the value of Minette's venture capital firm skyrocketed from under $1,000 with no income at all to suddenly having a net worth of up to $25 million, even though the firm had zero reported income. I know what you're thinking. Tell me more. Yeah, we found out more. Additionally, she says that during the same time frame, her husband's California winery magically saw its value soar from $50,000 to nearly $5 million, and basically overnight. Now, if that doesn't make you raise an eyebrow, check this out. Omar makes less than $175,000 a year for her role as a congresswoman, a government job. And when she first entered Congress back in 2018, she reported a negative net worth, including substantial student loan and car payments as well. And by the way, this isn't the first time that people have been questioning the financial activities of the Congresswoman and her husband. In 2019, Omar widely panned for forking over $3 million in campaign money to her husband's former consultancy group as part of the 2020 election cycle. And mind you, this transfer took place before the two were even married. In the meantime, the lawmaker who's ratcheting up efforts to kick Omar out of Congress entirely, now doubling down and pushing for a full-scale investigation into whether or not the Congresswoman ever actually committed or covered up any type of alleged fraud at all. Furthermore, Florida Republican Randy Fine claims there's a pervasive culture of immigration, Medicaid, and welfare fraud running through Minnesota's entire Somali community. That Omar is basically their kind of ringleader, and that turns out she lied in any way. She should be sent back to her country of birth along with everyone else. It's what you call Randy Fine fighting words. And for her part, Omar trying to get Fine kicked out of Congress as well, saying he's nothing more than a flat-out racist. No, he's really not. She also is pushing back against any and all critics of her recent financial windfall, claiming they're simply part of a coordinated right-wing effort to bring her down. Deflection to the nth degree. Final thought, and this is the News Roundup Lowdown. Look, I'm no math whiz, and I'm far from a genius with numbers, but something here doesn't exactly add up. Now, even if you made $1 million a year and never spent a nickel of it, and you weren't taxed on any of it, and you socked it all away, it would still take you 30 years to accumulate $30 million. That's pretty basic math. And I'm not accusing anybody of anything, but it kind of feels like we might not know the full and complete story. And to explain everything away by saying the astronomical amount of money in her checking account is from her husband's holdings sounds mildly peculiar, maybe even questionable. But I'm just a dumb old roundupper. What do I know? It's also this, and honestly, I'm thrilled that her and her hubby have 30 million clams in loose change lying around the house. But think on this. You'll recall that on a number of occasions, Ms. Omar has been more than candid about the wealthy not paying their fair share in taxes. And now that she's miraculously a member of the Multi-Millionaires Club, well, perhaps she'll step in and dole out 70 or 80 or 90% of her wealth, with a good portion of that going to fund, at her request, social programs. However, we'll have to ensure that her tax money doesn't fund the social programs which have fallen victim to fraud in her Minnesota district and statewide. Hey, Producer Davey, it'd all be good if she ponies up the dough, but I'd be satisfied. What are you thinking?
Well, Bill, I don't think she'd be stupid enough to make any major mistakes on her congressional forms, but it's sure hard to explain how you can increase your net worth without any sort of legitimate income.
Yeah, and just like that overnight. Look, greed and gross wealth only evil when it's somebody else's wealth, not when it's hers. In that case, it's going to be a little bit different. All right, stick with a bit of a related topic now and focus our lens on the growing troubles currently facing Minnesota's embattled Governor Tim Walz, and which are now rapidly spreading throughout his entire state, spreading like an out-of-control fungus. You know, a scathing new letter aimed at Walz and his cronies, a group of 98 mayors from all over the state, they're warning that fraud, out-of-control spending, and the governor's poor fiscal management are now trickling down to their cities and significantly threatening their way of life. Good job there, Tim. The group says the cash drain owing to the combination of all those factors is severely affecting their current ability to maintain their crumbling infrastructure, hold on to critical employees, and merely sustain the basic core services which are desperately needed by the folks that live there. They also say that due to what's going on, they're now facing a drastic reduction in local investment combined with much higher operating costs, and this is all resulting in a growing number of families choosing to bail out while they still can and simply abandon Minnesota altogether. I get it. I looked at a map and head west over to the Dakotas. They say it's pretty good living. Kind of cold, but pretty good living. Meanwhile, Republican state lawmakers are pointing the finger directly at Governor Walz and blaming his Democratic policies for the problem. And they say despite all of his long-winded promises, the governor hasn't made life more affordable at all. And that in reality, he's just kind of passing the buck to local governments and forcing them to raise taxes simply to stay afloat. In the letter, the mayors point out that Walz's fiscal policies have turned an $18 billion state surplus into an estimated $3 billion deficit over the next 4 years. In my mind, that's just criminal. It's dumb. In the meantime, Walz still has his hands full dealing with the ongoing repercussions of his state's massive welfare fraud scandal, as well as the resulting immigration crackdown by the federal government, which it prompted. Hey, look, they're on to you, Timbo. But don't be nervous. Now, the governor says that Minnesota law enforcement will not be helping out with those efforts in any way, and he's warning people to expect the worst and prepare now for a cruel influx of what he says ICE agents into the Twin Cities and throughout the entire holiday season. For their part, state Republicans say that Walz's immigration warnings are just more of his same old song and dance. Yeah, it's a different version of the two-step. It's called the deflection dance, and even with two left feet, anybody can do it. They point out that ICE is targeting criminals, that federal authorities are simply cleaning up his mess, and that if Governor Walz is so concerned about chaos on his streets, he ought to begin by explaining how billions of taxpayer dollars were stolen, and on his watch. That'd be kind of a grand starting point. Final thought, and this is the News Roundup Lowdown. By now, you know the backstory regarding all the financial improprieties going on in Minnesota. Billions of dollars worth of fraud means that a bunch of folks have gotten rich. Many have been caught and are serving time in the joint. Others, they're being investigated. And that Governor Tim Walz fella, being the brilliant state leader that he is, has claimed more than once that while the fraud was occurring, he knew absolutely nothing. You know, we've all been sucker punched, and our taxes have been misappropriated to fund the lifestyles of a bunch of individuals with absolutely no conscience. While we all want our voices heard and our money back, it's clearly going to be an enormous uphill battle. But we're off to somewhat of a good start with dozens of city leaders up and down the state voicing their concerns. Now, look, concern is nifty and all, and it might even score some of those mayors another term in office. But they should be doing a lot more. Those mayors and their constituents should be creating a massive online petition demanding that the chief executive officer of Minnesota, Tim Walz, immediately be replaced, and all in an effort to get that state back on the straight and narrow. Hey, Producer Davey, these are my demands. And as the roundupper in charge, I demand change. And your thoughts, sir?
Well, Bill, it's highly unlikely that WALZ is going to leave office before his term ends. And if people have a legitimate grievance, they have the right to deal with it at the ballot box.
Absolutely. And that ballot box will come your way in, I think, about a year or so. In the meantime, to keep that guy in the governor's mansion right now is to approve of every evil thing that has happened under his expert stewardship as the governor of the fine state of Minnesota. Turn our attention now to Washington, where officials and lawmakers alike now doing all they can to control the fraud damage in Minnesota from spreading even further. We can't have that. And taking extreme measures, all to ensure that nothing similar ever happens again anywhere in the U.S. How can that happen again? I think all the money's already gone. On Capitol Hill, one lawmaker introducing a new bill called the WALZ Act, which aims to protect taxpayer money from being used improperly at our nation's Department of Health and Human Services. The measure stands for Welfare, Abuse, and Laundering Zillions Act. I like that. And it would require the Health Department's Inspector General to open an investigation into any programs whose total payments increase by more than 10% in any 6-month period during a single year. Yeah, basic junk. You sit there and you watch for red flags. That's part of the job. The lawmaker says she named her bill after the Minnesota governor because WALZ showed a jaw-dropping failure of leadership and that the measure puts hard safeguards in place to make sure his level of negligence can never be repeated anywhere else, not just in Minnesota, but nationwide, all across the country. Meanwhile, it just keeps getting worse for the former vice presidential candidate. Now, the Federal Small Business Administration, the SBA, has just sent a letter to WALZ informing him that due to his inability to safeguard taxpayer dollars, they're calling a halt to nearly $6 million in annual support, which they've been sending to Minnesota, and that's in order to help struggling mom and pop enterprises get by. The hits just keep on coming. In her scathing letter, the agency's top administrator says right now the potential fraud in Minnesota is staggering, and that the only thing worse is the governor's response to everyone who tried to jump in and put a stop to it. She also claims that when whistleblowers tried desperately to alert WALZ to what was going on, his administration responded by resisting oversight, refusing to take responsibility, and allowing the misconduct to continue growing right under their noses. That is utterly disgraceful. And final thought, this is the News Roundup Lowdown. You know, the great leaders in our country, mayors, governors, even presidents, always say the buck stops here. Harry S. Truman, very famous for that saying. Now, perhaps Tim Walz, among other things, is not one of our country's great leaders because time and again, he claimed no knowledge of what was happening while he was the gatekeeper of the Minnesota three-ring circus of fraud, corruption, and scandal. I think Barnum and Bailey would have been impressed by this guy's circus. Yeah, it was that big. It was that good. On the other hand, as we just discussed, you've got literally dozens and dozens of mayors in Minnesota standing up, speaking out, making clear that the state's fiscal policies are damaging their cities and the fine citizens who live and work there and go to school there. Now, because Terrific Tim has generated so much conflict, it's a Republican congresswoman from Iowa to the rescue, and she's also a doctor, by the way, and her RX is called the WALZ Act, a fine prescription indeed, 20 milligrams a day, 3 times a day. Safeguards should have already been in place, and that things have become so corrupt that a lawmaker from another state had to step in and clean up his mess. Well, that should be embarrassing and humiliating to Tim Walz, but that's most likely way over his head. In other words, he just got schooled. Minnesota, you are right now saddled with a lame duck leader who's governing with training wheels. And the longer he loiters around in the governor's mansion, the longer it's going to take for your state to finally bounce back. Now, producer Davey, the WALZ Act, I like it, and do you think it's going to have any impact?
Well, Bill, this is nothing more than another attention-grabbing dog and pony show. Look, The Inspector General should always be auditing federal programs. Yeah. That's their job.
Right. So you're saying perhaps maybe they dropped the ball just a little bit as well. Look, this guy's had 5 or 6 years to effect change as a governor, but he did nothing. He did nothing. He said nothing. He fixed nothing. Good job, Governor Walz. Well played, sir. That's some fine legacy you are going to be leaving behind. All right, change things up now just a bit, and we'll turn to an alarming new Pentagon report which shows that China dramatically upping the ante when it comes to the aggressive deployment of long-range weapons. According to the confidential report, the communist regime recently loaded more than, check this out, 100 of their state-of-the-art intercontinental ballistic missiles, their ICBMs, into brand new silos located near the border with Mongolia. So you know, this should have you abundantly concerned. Goes on to warn that right now China, they're expanding their nuclear arsenal faster than any other world power, and that despite their claims to the contrary. They have no desire to engage in any sort of meaningful arms control talks whatsoever. And make no mistake, China right now is the one to watch. We're watching Russia as well, but you got to watch China. Additionally, the report says that the communist regime is still preparing to fight and win a war with Taiwan in the next couple of years, including by launching a barrage of long-range strikes, all designed to disrupt American military operations throughout the entire region. Now, recently, we've been focusing quite a bit of attention on the Minnesota fraud scandal, but we're always keeping an eye as well on everything else that's happening all around the country. Now, some additional headlines that we are keeping a close watch on here in the News Roundup newsroom. And first, an independent watchdog for the health department revealing that between 2021 and 2022, Medicaid programs made more than $200 million in payments to people. You're not going to believe this. People who were already dead, adding that future audits will hopefully kind of keep things similar from happening ever again. That is a lot of bread. President Trump also announcing an audacious plan now to build a fleet of modern, new, state-of-the-art battleships, naming them after himself and claiming they'll be the fastest, biggest, and most powerful weapons on the water. And just in time for Christmas, ICE releasing a new AI-enhanced video showing an agent dressed up as Santa Claus while rounding up a bunch of illegal immigrants. The message also urging people who are here illegally to self-deport before they wind up on the naughty list for the holidays. And a quick gander now at a bit of rock and roll showbiz news, and we kick things off today with a shocking revelation concerning Hollywood legend Tom Cruise and his starring role in one of the most popular movie franchises of all time. According to Mission Impossible actor Simon Pegg, at one point, Paramount Studios, they were actually angling to replace Tom Cruise as the top of the IMF Impossible Missions Force by tailoring the fourth movie in the series to spotlight another character played by actor Jeremy Renner. I know that guy. However, when the Top Gunner realized what was happening, he immediately flew back to L.A., confronted the studio head, and commissioned a major script rewrite, ensuring he'd hold on to his lucrative gig all the way to the final reckoning. Here's the way I see it. Paramount, they're actually smart in their effort to try to replace Tom Cruise as the star for that goofy Impossible Missions movie. And that's because, quite simply, Tom Cruise is not what you would call a bankable star. His series of MI movies, they've only generated about $4 billion worldwide. And if you think about it, that's not even half of all the fraud allegedly committed in Minnesota. So Paramount, you stay on the trail. You're on the right path. And for the next MI flick, I'm just thinking out loud, but try Jack Black or maybe that Seth Rogen fella. He'd make a great Ethan Hunt. Oh, and speaking of Hollywood, another filmmaker now shedding a bit of light on the cause of a long-running feud between iconic director Steven Spielberg and actor Ben Affleck. The insider claims that to this very day, Spielberg holds a major grudge against Affleck and refuses to work with him because a couple of decades back when the actor was dating his goddaughter, Gwyneth Paltrow, lovely young gal, Affleck made his son cry by unexpectedly tossing him into a swimming pool at a party. Holding grudges. Interesting headline, and this really speaks to the power which is wielded by what I think is the greatest movie maker in the history of cinema. This guy, Spielberg, so talented, he calls all the shots. And I tell you, he is Hollywood. He can make or break anyone's career just like that. This time, however, I think he got it wrong. Davey, I think he got it wrong.
Bill, how did he get it wrong?
Well, look, anytime you have a chance to work with the owner of a legendary nationwide insurance company, you got to bury the hatchet and do what you can, swallow some pride, and make a hit with Ben Affleck.
No, Bill. Affleck is an insurance company,
Yeah.
and this actor's name is Ben Affleck.
Oh, two different things. Yes?
Yes, two different things
Okay.
completely.
I think I'm on to you now. Turning now to television, and a surprising announcement from a late-night talk show personality who'll soon be looking for a new gig. Yeah, late show host Stephen Colbert, that handsome fellow there, weighing in on the chance that he'll run for president in 2028. President Colbert. I kind of like that. That'll be after his show goes off the air sometime next year. Says he completely understands why people want him to run, that he'd have to talk it over with his family first, and that they all need to discuss whether or not he can be of greater service to the nation he loves. Stephen Colbert could absolutely be the next president of the United States. Never discount him. Never count him out. You know, like those he admires greatly, Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, Barack Obama, and the others. He's dismissive, argumentative, condescending, and brutally divisive. Yeah, he's a one-trick pony. His show has been canceled. He's got nowhere else to go. and President Colbert. I like the sound of it. And Davey, let me pick your brain just a bit. Vice President, I say he picks the guy who got gypped last time around, a little-known governor from Minnesota called Tim Walz. Now, you think about that, Colbert Walz, the fine ticket in 2028. And now time for us to call it a wrap on the big news roundup. So have an awesome day. Christmas is coming up. It's just hours away. Stay safe. If you haven't done so already, we ask you once again to hit that subscribe button. And with that, we're going to dim the lights. We'll gently fade to black, and we'll see you right back here tomorrow afternoon for a brand new edition of the Big News Roundup.